YouTube? Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. This is a 2003 Honda Ruckus. It's got an alloy tube frame, it's pretty lightweight, and for this year it came in bright red. It handles well, it's got a relatively comfortable upright riding position, it's reliable, it's fuel efficient, and most of all, it's a lot of fun. But what do you get if you want something that embodies all of those characteristics, but you want a little bit more power? Well, the answer to that is something like this. A 2020 Ducati Hypermotard 950. At 18 times the displacement and 28 times the power, this is basically a Honda Ruckus on steroids. It reads pretty much like the Ruckus as well. It's got an alloy tube frame, it's relatively lightweight, and it's got a comfortable riding position. It handles well, it's efficient, it's reliable, and most of all, it's a lot of fun. It even comes in red, though in my case, mine's wrapped purple. So that wraps it up then. If you want the ultimate fun machine on two wheels, this is the bike to get. Or is it? You see, over the years, Ducati has made better and better bikes. It's added ride-by-wire, anti-lock brakes, traction control, wheelie control, the list goes on. But if you're looking for something a bit more raw, a bit more unhinged, well, not all that long ago, Ducati did make bikes like that. Bikes that were simpler, without any rider aids, without all the complexity. No traction control, no ABS, no other electronic tomfoolery to get in the way. Just you, a big V-twin thumping between your legs, and the throttle. This is the 950's granddad, and arguably one of the most unhinged and extreme Ducatis that they have ever made. This is a 2010 Ducati Hypermotard 1100 Evo SP. Bit of a mouthful. And I would argue that this may be the pinnacles of hooliganism and raw riding experience from Ducati, where every bike since has seemed a little more tame, a little bit more soft-edged, and feels a little bit less fun. Today, I'm going to directly compare not just these two Hypers, but the three Ducati Hypermotards that I've owned, back to back to back. The 821, the 1100, and the 950. And I'm going to tell you which bike is best on the road, which bike is best on the track, and which bike is my favorite overall. So grab a comfy chair and let's get into it. I've wanted to make this video for a long time, as I have a pretty unique perspective. I grew up racing motocross and spending a lot of time around dirt bikes, so the Hyper had kind of always caught my eye as a fun-looking bike. After owning back-to-back Yamahas, first an R6 and then a Yamaha R1, I was finding that those bikes were just starting to fall a little bit short for me. Sure, they're a blast for acceleration, for sound, but they're pretty boring to ride on public roads. They don't really get fun until you're well into the higher RPMs, but when you get there, even in first gear, you're doing well above 60 miles an hour. In fact, redline in the first gear on my 2009 R1 was 110 miles an hour. I can hear you saying, well, maybe you should just go to the track. So I did. I did several track days on the R1 and it excelled there. Big power, big bike, super bike looks, and the crossplane engine was fantastic. But anytime I wasn't on track after that, it started to just feel boring. Long rides up in the mountains were even worse. The aggressive riding position aggravated an old wrist injury, and by the end of 6 to 8 hours of riding, you would hobble inside, stiff and in pain from such a compromised riding position. Your neck would hurt from hours of wind blast, your legs and lower back would hurt from being curled up like a pretzel, and your wrists and arms would hurt from supporting your torso. The seats were firm, so your butt would go numb, and overall, I started to question why I even owned an R1. Enter the 821. Made from 2013 until 2015 and then continued on as the 939, the 821 was my first exposure to the Hypermotard and my first Ducati. I happened to live about 15 minutes from the premier Ducati dealership on the East Coast, so I had a unique opportunity to try something different. After trying a Street Fighter and the Hyper back to back, the choice was clear. The Hypermotard was what I wanted. So I traded in my R1 for a shiny new 2013 Hyper 821 and I got to riding. Over the 12,000 or so miles that I put on in the 5 years I owned it, I did road trips, I did mountain rides, and I did about 10 track days. I rode it as much as I could. My 821 was an absolute hoot of a bike. It was torquey down low compared to the sport bikes that I was coming from, had decent top-end speed and an upright, comfortable riding position. It was fast without being brutal. It looked great. It was low maintenance and relatively softly sprung, so it could eat up crappy pavement or even a packed dirt road pretty easily. Of all the Hypers that came before or after, I think it's the best looking bike. Though for me, the sound was a little bit of a departure from the older 2-valve motors and sounded somewhat less distinct. It has a single-sided swing arm to evoke a lot of that Ducati-ness, but lacked the underseat exhaust of the earlier bikes. It looks special and does draw attention everywhere from other riders, and people are always curious how I liked it. The biggest standout thing about the bike for me was it was really fun at street legal speeds. 30 to 45, this thing was a total hoot. Pop up over a hill, roll on the gas, let the torque do its thing, and then let off, hear the engine crackle, lean into a corner, and repeat. Coming from bikes that felt dull at legal speeds, the 821 was a big breath of fresh air. Since most of my riding was, and is, still street riding, not enjoying the on-road experience was a big problem for me, and it was one that the 821 fixed completely. Here are some of the pros that I saw with the 821. It has a comfy, completely neutral riding position. You have zero weight on your wrists, and your legs aren't totally curled up. It has approachable power, and it wasn't scary at the limit, and it wasn't too fast. Now for the cons. Arguably a step back in power from the first Hyper, the 1100, though it felt torquey down low to me, coming from sport bikes. It definitely doesn't pull as hard as the 1100 does, or the 950 for that matter. Though my bike was reliable, there was a lot of chatter online about pretty serious issues. I never had problems, and I did all the recommended services, so I can't speak to those, but if I was buying a used one, it'd give me a little bit of pause to think about it. It also has a short, grabby clutch. I never found it to really stand out since I came from motocross bikes, but again, people online called out that the grabby clutch had a very short engagement zone. Your mileage may vary there, since I never really found it to be a problem, but it's something to consider. The stock seat. Though the riding position is great, the seat is very scooped, and it kind of holds you in one position on the seat where you can't slide back or forth or even really too much side to side, and you're in a low spot. Fine most of the time, and the Ducati Performance seat does fix that with a bit of a flatter surface, but for a bike that was inspired by super motard bikes with flat seats, it seemed kind of like an odd choice to me. It wasn't too firm or anything. Overall, it was pretty soft, but it just doesn't let you move around very much. The bike is tall. I'm 6'4", so it wasn't really an issue for me, but anybody below about 6 feet tall will find it hard to flat foot with both feet while you're standing on it. The SP version is an inch taller still, so not really a bike for shorter people. That said, the standard maneuver when you're coming to a stop was to just scooch over to one side a bit and kind of sit down on one cheek and stand on the other leg, and then you don't really have any issues. All in all, the 821 is a fantastic bike. However, the 821 also doesn't exist in a vacuum. Enter the 1100. Produced from 2007 to 2012, mine is a later example, the 2010, part of the Evo line. Evo is Ducati's way of saying that they've updated and revised kind of a mid-cycle refresh for the bike. They fixed several complaints and issues with the first production run, made the bikes more reliable, and updated several things. The 1100 is air-cooled versus the 821 being water-cooled. Air cooling is simpler, a little bit lighter, and limits how much the motor can be high-strung before overheating. Beyond a certain point, you just can't make more power because you're not going to get enough cooling. However, these motors were also 2-valve, which means that they sound fantastic. They have that big, lumpy, thumpy sound, which has long been a Ducati trademark. In addition to the sound, they are very torquey and the power comes on very low in the RPM range. If I thought the 821 was a beast, this thing is on another level. The 1100 is raw and it's unfiltered. 0 rider aids, no assists. This thing is pretty basic. It comes from a time when many of those things didn't even really exist, except maybe as fancier features on a top-tier race bike. Instead, this bike leans in on involvement and character. The 1100 is a handful to ride though. It has a dry clutch with no slipper clutch involved. It's even taller than the 821, and I can barely flat foot it without sitting on the seat. It often tries to break the rear tire loose when you roll on the throttle, and anytime it gets traction, it wants to loft the front end. It has a fun flaw where coming to a stop and pulling in the clutch, sometimes the RPMs will drop a little too much and it'll stall. It radiates quite a bit of heat onto the rider, and it gets, at most, maybe 100 miles per tank of gas. The brakes are very, very strong, but no ABS, so you do have to be careful. If the 821 was like having a pet golden retriever, the 1100 is like having a pet hyena. Strong, good looking, but untamed and always trying to bite you. You have to pay attention 100% of the time when you're riding it because all of those factors come together to make it a challenge to ride. But I will say, for all of its imperfections, the bike is an absolute riot to ride. The torque down low completely overshadows the 821. The growl of the engine is music. The lightweight handling is sublime, and the bike is every good aspect of the 821, but turned up to 11. It's challenging to ride well and smoothly, especially at speed, but it is incredibly rewarding when you do. The Evo SP model is even a notch up, the rarest and fanciest versions of an already fairly uncommon bike. It's a rolling piece of art, dripping with carbon fiber, lighter components, and top-shelf suspension. I got incredibly lucky with mine, buying it just a couple years ago with 728 miles for a song. So here are the pros of the 1100. Power, right up front. This bike pulls really, really hard just off idle and well into extra legal speeds. It'll easily wheelie up through third gear just by rolling on the throttle. In fact, first gear, you really can't floor it. The torque is perhaps the most noticeable feature, making even a casual drive much more exciting. Sound. This is what classic Ducatis are supposed to sound like. The thumping of the motor, the rattling, clacking of the dry clutch, the chirp of the tires if you downshift a bit early. Engagement. I have yet to ride a more engaging bike. You need to be 100% focused to really ride this thing, especially to ride it fast. It's sort of like selecting a manual F40 to drive when your alternative is a GT3 with a PDK transmission. The rider is the center of the experience, and the success or failure of your skills will determine how much you like riding it. Looks. Easily one of the best looking Ducatis ever made in my opinion, and one of the most unique. Every time I take it to the dealership or a gas station, I get comments and questions. Simple and unfiltered. On paper, it's not as capable as either of the other bikes. They're both faster on track, they're both safer to ride, and they both have higher limits. But this bike aims to do one thing, and do it better than any other bike before it or after it, and that's make you smile and laugh at how preposterous and ridiculous it is. And every time I ride it, that's how I feel. Now there are a couple cons. First, it's very tall, and it's a tall bike even for me. Anyone under 6'2" is gonna be on their tiptoes or one-footing it. Narrow bars. Despite appearing wide because of those unique factory bar end mirrors, the bike actually has bars that feel at least an inch or two narrower than the 950. In a vacuum, they'd be fine, but compared to the 950 back-to-back, they feel kind of narrow, and it has a little bit of a strange bend to them, and overall are just less comfortable. Expensive parts. This bike has been out of production for 13 years. Last year, when I crashed on mine at the track, I learned that you shouldn't crash these because some $4,000 to $5,000 later, the bike is back in factory spec, but only after my dealership spent weeks tracking down parts that have been sitting in the dust on the back of some shelf at a warehouse in Italy for the last decade or so. Some of the parts, like the mirrors, are not only really impossible to get, but a set of them run to $750 to $1,000. The hand-painted fairings, nearly impossible to source. I bought the literal last Scott steering damper for this type of bike on the planet. Literally, I called Scott and he scrounged it from a parts bin. My frame sliders came from a rider in Norway who never installed them on his bike a decade ago. I stopped tracking this bike purely because the cost of fixing it and the relative unavailability of a lot of the parts was too daunting if I was to have another crash. Range. The Hyper 1100 has a pretty short range. Despite a relatively average 3.2 gallon tank, the real world range for it is pushing it if you're going to reach 100 miles. When driven hard though, expect to get around 80 miles per tank. One of the best, but hardest to find mods out there is actually a 6.9 gallon tank from CA CycleWorks, which retains a completely stock look, kind of fits inside the frame, while raising your range to over 200 miles. I'm still on the search for one, so if you have one, send me a note. Unforgiving. Lastly, I'll say that this bike is pretty unforgiving. It's a bike where you get out of it what you put into it. Expert riders are going to appreciate it and enjoy it. Beginner or intermediate riders are probably going to hate it. Rides on it are not relaxing at all. It wants to stall somewhat at intersections, the clutch can be a bit grabby, it chirps the tires if you downshift early at a higher speed. It breaks traction if you roll on the throttle on an off-camber corner. It tries to wheelie even if you don't want it to. If you're a gear too high, it shakes like a jackhammer, and the list goes on. You are at full attention the whole ride, and if you let your guard down, you're likely going to get bit. That said, if you're looking for a raw, engaging, and rewarding bike to master, look no further. Now there is a hidden pro to the 1100. It's affordable? What? Surprisingly, yes. Used 1100s are plentiful, and depending on the condition, they can range from about $5,000 to about $10,000, with most falling between 6 and 7 for a reasonable, good condition bike, with the occasional low mile Evo SP coming up a little bit higher than that. As I said, parts are expensive, but if you don't crash it, it's actually pretty cheap to own and operate. My suggestion would be to go for a 2010 or newer model and an S if possible, as several of the revisions and improvements over the early bikes will keep it reliable. That's those Evo bikes I mentioned. Also, go for as stock as possible. I don't plan on modifying mine at all, as it's already perfect. The two mods I have are the steering damper and the frame sliders, both of which are removable and don't impact the cosmetics or the mechanics of the bike. Now we're on to the young gun, the overachiever, the designated hitter, the Hyper 950. I bought this bike primarily to be a track bike after finding out the hard way that the 1100 is very difficult and expensive to get parts for when you crash it. Though intended originally as just a track bike, now that I've ridden it for the past season, my perspective has widened. It's great on track, but also great on the road, and is really a fantastic all-around bike. The 950 actually has an evolution of the motor from the 939. Ducati famously fudges the numbers on most of their bikes, so whatever the number is in the name, it's usually more of a round number or a catchy to say than the reality of the displacement. For example, the 821 is actually 821.1 cc's. The 1100 though is 1078 cc's, and the 939 is 937, and the 950 is 937. I think in many cases, when customers see a bigger number, they assume or think better, regardless of if it's the same thing underneath or not. Despite the same displacement, the 950 is a significant departure from the 821 939 platform. It makes a number of big changes. It has a much more comprehensive and advanced electronics suite with all kinds of functions and protections for the rider. It has a full-color TFT LCD screen. It has an underseat exhaust. It has a big, long, flat seat that you can move around on, wider bars, enhanced ergonomics, and a whole host of other improvements and incremental upgrades over prior versions. Despite the aggressive looks, it's a surprisingly docile bike when you're just putting around, and it's very easy to learn. However, when you roll on the power, it gets aggressive quickly and is deceptive in how fast it is. The best way to describe it for me is easy mode. It's easy to ride. It's easy to ride fast. It's forgiving with all those electronics, and it makes you feel like a hero without being too intrusive. It handles great, it gets good mileage, it sounds and looks good. It's reliable and is one of the most competent bikes that I've ever owned. To say that it's too good is not really much of a stretch. I see it as sort of an anti-1100 in many ways, while somehow still having more personality than the 821 and being exciting at all times. So there are a lot of pros to the 850. Easy to ride fast. As I touched on before, it's easy to ride and easy to ride fast. You can dial in the electronics to your exact riding style or ability. Comfortable. Of the three bikes, it's easily the most comfortable. The bars are nice and wide, and they're flat, giving you good leverage to turn quickly and effortlessly, but not tiring out your wrist. You're not getting any weight on them. The seat is long and flat, so you can move around, and it's more comfortable than either of the other two bikes. Engaging. I was honestly skeptical that it would be much more engaging than the 821, but it is, significantly so. It accelerates with alarming urgency. The fueling and throttle, despite being ride-by-wire, are immediate and smooth. Blipping for downshifts, I always get a nice brap from the exhaust without any effort. The chassis is communicative and compliant. The suspension on the base model is a good balance of comfort and performance. It handles well and has a safety net for you if you make a mistake, but you never really notice any of those nannies unless you really screw something up. Now there are a couple cons. First is that it's expensive. If you're buying it new, you're looking at $16K for the base model like mine, or maybe around $20K for the SP version. The used market is pretty full of these, but most people selling them are trying to recoup some of the money that they spent, and you're not going to get too much off the price. Tall. Again, I don't find this to be a con, but anyone shorter than 6 feet probably will. The next, this is a little thing, but the menu button for wiping your mileage on your trip odometer is the same one you use to cancel your blinker. If you press it twice, you lose your mileage since the last fill up. And that's actually kind of it for the cons that I've found on the bike so far. I'm sure there are more, and I'll uncover them as I put more miles on it, but so far it's been really, really good. I do want to speak a little bit more about one con that all of these bikes have, and that's when tracking the bike, the stock foot pegs are a little bit low and will drag right around the point where you're dragging your knee. There are solutions to this, whether aftermarket rear sets or adjusting your riding position, but it is worth mentioning that no matter how tall these bikes are, the relatively low pegs can drag when you're cornering hard. My 821's pegs had probably half an inch of metal scraped off by the time I sold it. On to road riding. The 821, as I mentioned, is fun at lower speeds, very forgiving, and has compliant suspension, so it's a really easy everyday bike. It's all-day comfortable despite the seat shape, and in the company of these other two bikes, it does everything well, but nothing really excellent. The 1100 is easily the most exciting and engaging, but can be borderline tiring if you ride it for hours on end. It's got the most character on the road, and is best at home on a hilly, winding road out away from towns and traffic. It makes me laugh more than either of the other two bikes and feels truly special in a way that the current bikes don't. It's not the most comfortable and demands attention and an expert rider, but is very, very rewarding when ridden well. The 950 does everything the 821 does, but significantly better. It's more comfortable, it's faster, it's easier to ride, more polished and smoother. It literally is the easy button of the Hypers and does everything so well, you'd be forgiven if you said that that makes it a little bit boring, because it's not boring. It's incredibly fast, has punchy throttle, but it has all those safety features that give you a little bit of extra protection if you make a mistake. One notable thing that I like is that you can run a gear or two too tall and it's not going to lug. There's got to be something with the electronics or the refinement, but when you roll on, it will smoothly accelerate even if you're in way too high of a gear. I've never had a bike that does this before, and it stands out to me. Mix in around 140 miles of range on the 3.8 gallon tank, and this bike is a great do-it-all bike. Let's get to what they're like on the track. The 821 is great on track. With similar power to the 950, it's surprising that it feels quite a bit slower. It's smooth above idle and forgiving. The power never really overwhelms the rider, and you can ham-fist it pretty heavily due to the first-gen traction control and ABS. This would make a really good track bike, especially on a budget, because used ones can be had for around $5,000. I found mine to be reliable as long as you do all the recommended services, and cheap to own and operate. Tires last several track days unless you're really pushing it or doing something wrong, and the bike never felt scary. I'd say the performance overall is right around a 600cc sport bike, though it's more maneuverable and in coming out of tight corners. It tops out somewhere around 130 miles an hour, so they get you on the straights, but then you pass them in the turns. The 1100 is the complete opposite of the 821 on track. As you'd expect from everything I've said already, it's a handful. Not in a bad way, and not beyond what you can handle, but you're again going to be engaged throughout. The biggest challenge here are the lack of a slipper clutch when downshifting, which can cause some tense moments as the back tire likes to skate and chirp all over the pavement till the RPMs and the speed match. And the brakes, while very, very good and communicative, have no ABS, and so you can lock them up. Power-wise, I would say the bike is closer to a 750 sport bike until around 100 miles an hour, and then tapers off as it approaches top speed, which is also around 130. Overall, while fun, it does feel like an older design and doesn't feel as stable as the 821 or the 950. It may not be one of the fastest bikes around the track, but it is one of the most fun. That leaves the 950. Truly, this is a class above the other two on track. I found the ability to fine-tune all the rider aids to suit my ability on the track to be fantastic. The transmission and the shifting are noticeably smooth. The slipper comes in great when you're coming down from speed, and it builds revs quickly. It'll out-accelerate 600s pretty handily, and it feels like an 821 on steroids, despite the engine being almost exactly the same as the 939. It complements the rider while still being engaging, has strong brakes, good suspension, and superb fueling and throttle. The sheer competence of all of this put together, it's one of the most fun bikes I've had on track in a long time, and I can't wait to do more track days on it. Coming to the overall rank of the three bikes is a bit subjective and a bit objective. While my order is 821 in third, 1100 in second, 950 in first, I struggle with the top two positions and have gone back and forth in my head. The 821 does everything well, but nothing exceptional. The 1100 is the expert level bike, which requires full engagement, but it's very rewarding when ridden near the limit. And the 950 is the superlative bike, great at everything with very few flaws. All of this leads to which one is my favorite. Well, the 821's out of the running. For the last few years, easily my favorite was the 1100. It's easily one of the best, most fun bikes I've ever owned. It's funny to me how an older bike is sometimes more fun than a newer bike. Seriously, anyone who has owned a Hyper or is thinking about one should go seek out an opportunity to own or ride one. It's that special. The 950 though was unexpected to me. I bought it strictly to ride at the track, but I rode it a little on the road and was like, what? How is it this good? Turns out, inexplicably, it's my current favorite, just edging out the 1100. More times than not, when I'm reaching for the keys, I pick the 950, probably about twice as often. With that, let me know what you think in the comments, and if you have a Hyper or have ridden several, let me know which one's your favorite and why. One of these days, I'm going to have to go try that new Hyper 698 Mono, and the new Hypermotard V2 is looking like it's coming out sometime next year, so I'm going to have to try both of those. So, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, Fred out!